We spend our entire existence cradled in an embrace so absolute, so unyielding, that we rarely think to question its true nature. From the first tentative steps of infancy to the quiet, heavy settling of old age, a silent architecture governs every gesture, every breath, and every falling tear. We call this architecture gravity, and we speak of it as an immutable law, a mathematical certainty that tethers our heels to the spinning earth and holds the moon in its faithful nocturnal orbit. It is the invisible glue of the cosmos, the silent partner in every dance, and the ultimate arbiter of upward ambition. Yet, if we dare to peel back the heavy velvet curtain of sensory habit, we begin to glimpse a profound and unsettling truth. Gravity might not work the way you think it does. It is not merely a localized pull, nor a simple magnetic-like attraction between heavy objects, but rather a whisper from the very fabric of existence itself, a symptom of a deeper, more fluid geometry that challenges our fundamental understanding of separation, presence, and connection. To understand this cosmic illusion, we must first recognize how deeply our minds are conditioned by the language of pulling and pushing. Since the dawn of classical mechanics, we have been taught to visualize the universe as a grand billiard table, where solid spheres exert a mysterious, invisible, rope-like tug on one another across vast expanses of empty void. We imagine the earth reaching out with ghostly fingers to grasp the apple from the bough, drawing it downward into its rocky chest. This conceptual model is comforting because it aligns with our daily experience of effort and resistance. We know what it feels like to pull a heavy sled uphill or to draw a bucket of water from a deep well. We naturally project this muscular, effortful mechanics onto the stars. We view gravity as an active force, an aggressive agent of collection that accumulates mass and demands submission. But this perspective, while functionally adequate for building bridges and launching primitive rockets, keeps us trapped in a superficial interpretation of reality. It treats the space between things as an empty, dead stage upon which solid actors perform their dramatic dances, ignoring the possibility that the stage itself is alive, awake, and actively composing the choreography. When we shift our gaze from the classical billiard table to the revolutionary insights of modern physics, the illusion of an active pulling force begins to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. And we discover that what we perceive as a downward tug is actually an upward push, or more accurately, a manifestation of geometry in motion. Imagine an immense, taut sheet of silken fabric suspended in the darkness of a quiet room. If you place a heavy sphere of lead upon this silk, the fabric does not merely support the weight, it yields, sinking into a smooth, elegant depression, warping its own pristine flatness into a funnel of potential. Now, if you roll a small glass marble across the silk, it will not travel in a straight line. It will feel the slope, curving gracefully around the central depression, perhaps spiraling downward toward the leaden sphere. The marble is not being pulled by an invisible cord attached to the lead. It is simply navigating the only path available to it through a landscape that has been profoundly altered. And it is following the natural contours of a modified environment. This is the radical revelation that shatters our common sense. Gravity is not something an object does across space. It is what space itself becomes in the presence of an object. This realization transforms the entire universe from a collection of isolated fragments into a single, continuous tapestry of relationship. The distinction between the actor and the stage vanishes, replaced by a profound realization that space and time are not empty containers, but active participants in the cosmic narrative. When you sit in a chair, feeling the solid pressure of the seat against your body, you are not experiencing the earth actively grabbing your bones and pulling them toward its core.
Bashe.
Instead, you are feeling the consequences of your body trying to move along its natural path through a warped arena of space-time, while the physical matter of the chair stands in your way, constantly accelerating you upward out of that natural curve. The ground beneath your feet is not a passive anchor. It is an active barrier preventing you from following the geometry of the universe. In this light, our everyday experience of weight is turned completely upside down. We are not being held down. We are being pushed up against a cosmic current that is constantly flowing through the room we inhabit. This poetic shift in understanding invites us to look at the larger patterns of our lives through a lens of profound interconnectedness. If the physical universe operates not through isolated, aggressive pulls, but through the quiet geometric shaping of the space we share, then perhaps the unseen currents of human experience follow a similar, hidden architecture. We often view our desires, our attachments, and our relationships as individual forces that we must exert or resist through sheer willpower. We speak of being drawn to a person, a career, or a place as if an invisible thread were tugging at our hearts. But what if these human attractions are also matters of geometry? What if our presence, our thoughts, and our deeply held convictions alter the invisible fabric around us, creating natural slopes and valleys that gently guide others into our lives? This perspective moves us away from a paradigm of manipulation and effort toward a paradigm of alignment and presence. And it suggests that to change the trajectory of our lives, we do not need to fight against invisible ropes. We simply need to understand the shape of the space we are creating. As we stand on the threshold of this deeper inquiry, we begin to see that the study of gravity is actually an invitation to contemplate the nature of illusion itself. It humbles us by demonstrating that our senses, while beautifully tuned for survival on a specific planetary surface, offer only a narrow, translated glimpse of reality. We see things fall, and we assume a downward force, missing the grand, invisible curving of space-time that orchestrates the descent. We feel solid and stationary, missing the truth that we are currently hurtling through a warped cosmic matrix at unimaginable speeds. But by learning to look past the immediate illusion of the force and toward the deeper truth of the fabric, we open our minds to a more expansive way of being. We begin to understand that everything in existence is connected not by strings of attachment, but by a shared, dynamic medium that ripples with every breath we take and every choice we make. The universe is not a chaotic room full of colliding parts, but a masterfully woven fabric where the fall of a leaf and the birth of a galaxy are guided by the same elegant, silent geometry. To wander deeper into this restructured cosmos, we must dismantle the foundational pillars of our sensory assumptions and replace them with the elegant, counterintuitive truths of general relativity. The first major concept we must encounter is the seamless unification of what we once thought were entirely separate dimensions. In our daily lives, we treat space as a three-dimensional playground, an arrangement of height, width, and depth within which events occur, while time is viewed as a separate, relentless river flowing from the past into the future at an unwavering pace. We measure space with rulers and time with clocks, confident that they do not mingle. However, the true architecture of gravity reveals that these two concepts are inextricably fused into a single, four-dimensional fabric known as space-time. And this fabric is not an inert backdrop. It is a dynamic, flexible medium that can be stretched, compressed, twisted, and bent. When mass and energy enter this arena, They do not merely sit within space-time, they dictate its very form. The presence of a planet or a star warps both the geometry of distance and the cadence of duration, weaving them into a singular, responsive matrix, where a distortion in space is simultaneously a distortion in time. This interweaving introduces us to the profound principle of geodesic motion, which completely redefines what it means to travel in a straight line. In our flat world intuition, a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, a path requiring no steering and no external influence. We imagine that an object left to its own devices will drift indefinitely in a pristine, unswerving trajectory through the void. But when space-time itself becomes curved by the presence of mass, the definition of a straight line undergoes a radical transformation. Objects in freefall, whether a dropped pencil, a skydiver, or the moon looping around the Earth, are actually traveling along paths called geodesics. These are the straightest possible lines through a curved universe. The pencil falling toward the floor is not being yanked downward by an aggressive, invisible rope. It is simply continuing its natural, effortless journey forward through a space-time environment that has been slanted by the massive presence of the Earth. The object is completely weightless, experiencing no forces whatsoever, utterly at peace as it follows the natural contours of a warped reality. From this perspective, the illusion of gravity as an attractive force arises entirely from our stubborn refusal to move along our natural geodesics. When you stand on the surface of the Earth, you are experiencing a state of constant, forced deviation from your natural path through space-time. Your natural geodesic would dictate that you fall directly toward the center of the Earth, floating effortlessly in a state of perpetual freefall. However, the solid matter of the planet's crust blocks your path, pushing against the soles of your feet and forcing you to accelerate upward out of your natural trajectory at a rate of 9.8 meters per second squared. What we call weight is not the pull of the Earth from below, but the physical resistance of the Earth as it constantly disrupts our cosmic inertia. We're like travelers on a train that is perpetually accelerating, thrown against the back wall of our compartment, mistakenly believing that some mysterious force is pulling us backward when, in truth, the train is violently pushing us forward. This distortion of the cosmic fabric extends far beyond the path of solid objects. It alters the behavior of light and the passage of time itself, revealing that even the most ethereal elements of existence are bound by this geometric dance. Because space-time is a unified whole, a heavy mass does not just bend the pathways of matter, it slows down the ticking of the cosmic clock. This phenomenon, known as gravitational time dilation, means that time passes more slowly in regions where the curvature of space-time is intense. A clock placed at the foot of a massive mountain will tick a fraction of a second slower than a clock resting at its peak, because the lower clock is embedded deeper within the gravitational valley created by the Earth's mass. Light, too, must navigate this uneven terrain. As a beam of starlight passes near a massive galaxy, it does not travel in a straight line across our sky. It curves gracefully around the cosmic obstacle, bent by the warped space-time environment through which it travels. We perceive this as gravitational lensing, an optical illusion where distant stars appear displaced or multiplied, showing us that even our sightlines through the cosmos are dictated by the unseen topography of the universe. This brings us to a beautiful reciprocal paradox that captures the essence of the cosmic architecture. Matter tells space how to curve, and space tells matter how to move. Yet there is no central commander in this system. no external lawgiver enforcing obedience from a distance. Instead, it is an intimate, localized conversation between energy and geometry. The sun does not need to send out signals to command the Earth to orbit. Its sheer mass simply sculpts the local space-time fabric into a deep, circular valley. The Earth, arriving at the edge of this valley, merely follows the path of least resistance, rolling around the slope like a marble in a bowl. This removes the need for any ghostly action at a distance, a concept that deeply troubled classical thinkers who could not explain how a force could travel instantly across millions of miles of empty nothingness. The modern answer is that the nothingness is actually a something, a responsive, elastic fabric that translates presence into motion instantly and locally. When we meditate on these core concepts, we begin to see that the universe operates through a system of profound elegance, where what appears to be a struggle is actually an alignment. The appearance of conflict, force, and heavy attraction is a localized interpretation of a grander, smoother truth. We mistake the warping of the medium for an aggressive interaction between parts, forgetting that the parts themselves are expressions of the medium. This realization challenges the fragmented worldview that dominates modern consciousness, suggesting that separation is an illusion born of an incomplete vantage point. The planet, the star, the falling leaf, and the light beam are not isolated islands shouting at each other across an empty void. They are interconnected peaks and valleys in a single, continuous sheet of existence, constantly whispering to one another through the language of shape and time. To bridge the gap between abstract mathematical equations and the deeply felt realities of human consciousness, we must turn to the timeless language of allegory and myth. The true nature of gravity, when viewed not as a mechanical tug-of-war, but as an elegant curvature of the world's hidden canvas, provides a profound mirror for our internal landscapes. Let us contemplate a symbolic narrative that illuminates this shift in perspective: the story of the wanderer and the mountain. For centuries, the people living at the base of an immense, mist-shrouded peak believed that the mountain possessed an aggressive, magnetic spirit that actively snatched travelers from its slopes, dragging them down into rocky ravines. They spoke of the mountain's anger, its heavy hand, and its jealous desire to keep humanity confined to the lowlands. And the climbers who attempted to scale its heights armed themselves with heavy spikes, thick ropes, and an attitude of violent defiance, viewing the ascent as a direct battle against an adversarial deity that sought to crush their ambition. One day, a quiet philosopher climbed the mountain without ropes or armor, carrying only a walking stick and a spirit of observation. As she ascended, she noticed that the path did not feel like a battle against an invisible hand. When she slipped, it was not because a ghostly arm pulled her down, but because the ledge she stepped upon was slanted toward the valley. She observed that the water from the melting glaciers did not rush downward out of anger, but simply chose the most effortless channel available in the rock. And the mountain was not doing anything to her. It was merely being itself, its vast mass creating a unique terrain of steep inclines, deep bowls, and narrow ridges. The struggle, she realized, belonged entirely to the climbers who insisted on forcing a straight, unnatural path up a landscape that demanded a circular, winding alignment. When she returned to the valley, she shared a radical truth. The mountain has no arms to pull you down, nor does it care about your ambition. It simply changes the shape of the world around it, and to walk its slopes, you must learn to speak the language of its curves. This allegory beautifully illustrates our relationship with the unseen structures of our own lives. We often find ourselves locked in exhausting battles against what we perceive as external forces, cycles of poverty, ancestral trauma, toxic relationship patterns, or systemic oppression. Yet we experience these realities as a heavy downward pull, an active hostility from the world around us that seeks to keep us trapped in the lowlands of our potential. We arm ourselves with willpower, anger, and defiance, trying to pull ourselves upward through sheer muscle. But if we look closer through the lens of our geometric understanding, we begin to realize that these heavy life conditions are not active forces striking out at us from a distance. They are the deep, historical depressions warped into the social, emotional, and psychological fabric of our world by massive concentrations of past events, choices, and structures. The downward momentum we experience is the natural slope of an environment that has been profoundly altered before we even arrived. Consider another symbolic landscape, a vast frozen lake where two skaters move across the pristine ice. From a distance, an observer notices that whenever the skaters approach one another, their paths curve inward, drawing them into a graceful, spiraling embrace. The observer, stuck in a classical frame of mind, assumes there is an invisible bungee cord stretched between them, actively pulling their bodies together against their will. They might even invent complex theories about the magnetic properties of human flesh or the psychic forces of attraction. But if we melt the ice and reveal that the lake is actually a giant, flexible trampoline, the truth becomes beautifully simple. The first skater, possessing a heavy, grounding presence, creates a deep, smooth indentation in the fabric of the surface. The second skater, moving across the same surface, naturally glides down the slope of that indentation. There is no cord, no manipulation, and no force. The attraction is entirely an expression of a shared environment, an intimacy born of navigating the same altered space. This image of the flexible surface shatters the myth of absolute isolation that causes so much suffering in the modern world. We are taught to view ourselves as self-contained units, floating through an empty, indifferent social void, occasionally reaching out to pull or push others through communication, contract, or conflict. This perspective breeds a deep sense of loneliness and a manic obsession with personal control. But the geometric narrative reminds us that we are always embedded in a responsive, living fabric. Your presence, your character, your deep-seated beliefs, and your emotional weight profoundly warps the space-time around you. And you do not need to aggressively pull people into your life or manipulate them into loving you. If you cultivate a heavy, authentic grounding in who you are, the fabric of reality will naturally slope toward you, guiding matching trajectories into your orbit along the paths of least resistance. Conversely, this narrative invites us to practice a profound form of forgiveness and understanding toward those whose paths seem erratic or destructive. When we see someone spiraling downward into addiction, despair, or rage, our immediate instinct is to judge them as weak or to assume they are being actively pulled by malevolent forces. We separate ourselves from them, confident that we would choose a straighter line. But the wisdom of curved space reminds us that we cannot judge the path of the traveler without understanding the topology of the terrain they are crossing. A path that looks wildly distorted and irrational from our flat, comfortable vantage point may actually be a perfect geodesic, the straightest, most effortless line possible, through a space-time fabric that has been violently warped by trauma, neglect, or systemic failure. To help them change their direction, we do not need to shout at them to walk straighter. We must work to heal and reshape the very fabric of the environment through which they move. Ultimately, these symbolic narratives reveal that the universe is not governed by a hierarchy of dominant forces demanding submission, but by a democracy of presence where every participant contributes to the shape of the whole. The smallest pebble warps space-time in its own infinitesimal way, just as the grandest supermassive black hole dictates the architecture of an entire galaxy, which we are not passive victims of a celestial tug-of-war, but active co-creators of a cosmic landscape. By shifting our awareness from the illusion of the pulling force to the reality of the curving fabric, we transcend the exhausted paradigm of struggle and enter a state of fluid grace, learning to ride the invisible currents of existence with the wisdom of a master mariner navigating the deep, rolling geometry of the sea. When we descend from the heights of cosmic allegory and plant our feet back onto the soil of daily existence, the realization that gravity is a matter of geometry rather than brute force alters how we approach our practical world. This is not just a shift for theoretical physicists. It is a blueprint for living with greater efficiency, emotional intelligence, and strategic grace. In our professional lives, creative endeavors, and personal habits, we are often conditioned to operate within a classical framework of effort. We believe that to achieve a goal, to change a behavior, or to move an organization forward, we must apply an immense localized force. We push against inertia, pull reluctant teams along through sheer willpower, and attempt to drag our habits into alignment with our ideals. Yet, this muscle-bound approach to life is exhausting, and it frequently fails because it treats every problem as an isolated object that must be conquered by an opposing force, ignoring the broader environment that sustains the problem. By integrating the insights of a curved universe, we can transition from a strategy of force to a strategy of design. Instead of trying to pull an object across a resistant flat surface, our focus shifts to altering the topography of the environment so that the desired outcome becomes the path of least resistance. In the realm of habit formation, this is the essence of behavioral architecture. If you wish to read more books and spend less time staring at digital screens, the classical approach demands that you sit in front of your television and use immense willpower to keep it turned off. And the geometric approach, however, recognizes that the television creates a deep, frictionless valley in your living room's behavioral space-time. To change your trajectory, you must reshape the terrain. You remove the television remote from the room, place it in a distant drawer, and set an open, inviting book directly on your favorite chair. By changing the physical and spatial contours of your environment, you make the unwanted behavior steep and difficult to climb, while the desired behavior becomes a natural, downhill slope that your momentum effortlessly follows. This principle of environmental design applies equally to leadership and organizational dynamics. Many leaders operate under the classical illusion that they must act as a central gravitational sun, constantly exerting an aggressive, supervisory pull to keep their employees orbiting around the company's objectives. And this creates a culture of dependency and burnout, where progress halts the moment the leader stops pulling. A visionary leader, steeped in the wisdom of geometry, focuses instead on creating a heavy, compelling cultural mass at the center of the enterprise. They define a crystal-clear purpose, establish transparent values, and design operational workflows that naturally guide individual ambitions into alignment with the collective mission. They do not need to micromanage the trajectory of every employee because the organizational space-time itself has been curved. Working toward the company's success becomes the natural geodesic, the most logical, rewarding, and effortless path for the individual to take. In the sphere of human relationships, this understanding transforms how we navigate conflict and intimacy. And when a relationship begins to drift or fracture, our instinct is often to deploy emotional forces. We demand attention, issue ultimatums, or try to pull the other person closer through guilt and manipulation. These actions are the psychological equivalents of tugging on an invisible rope, and they almost always trigger an equal and opposite reaction of resistance, pushing the other person further away. If we accept that attraction is a consequence of a shared, altered medium, we realize that the most effective way to invite closeness is to deepen our own personal gravity. We focus our energy inward, cultivating our own emotional maturity, processing our traumas, and anchoring ourselves in an authentic, stable presence. As we grow heavier in our self-worth and inner peace, we create a beautiful, welcoming depression in the emotional fabric around us. And others are not forced or coerced into our lives. They simply slide into our orbit because being near us feels grounded, safe, and effortlessly aligned. This perspective also revolutionizes our relationship with time and productivity. We live in a culture obsessed with acceleration, rushing through our days in a desperate bid to outrun our deadlines, operating under the assumption that time is an unyielding, objective river. But remember the lesson of gravitational time dilation. Time passes differently depending on the depth of the valley you occupy. When we live in a state of chronic distraction, frantic multitasking, and superficial engagement, we are living in a flat, weightless, psychological landscape where time slips through our fingers like dry sand. And however, when we immerse ourselves deeply in a single meaningful task, entering what psychologists call the state of flow, we accumulate immense psychological mass. In those moments of profound concentration, we sink into a deep valley of presence, and our internal clock slows down. We accomplish more in an hour of deep, weighted focus than in a week of fractured busyness, proving that time is not a fixed dictator, but a flexible dimension that yields to the density of our attention. Ultimately, the real-world implication of this cosmic truth is a call to trade our exhaustion for elegance. It invites us to stop viewing ourselves as isolated combatants fighting against a hostile, chaotic world, and to start seeing ourselves as architects of reality. Every choice we make, every boundary we set, and every truth we embody alters the invisible grid of the world we inhabit. We do not need to fix everything through aggressive manipulation. We simply need to become conscious of the shapes we are making. By mastering the art of creating slopes, valleys, and orbits within our immediate environments, we discover that the universe is not an adversary to be conquered, but a responsive partner waiting to assist our movement, allowing us to accomplish monumental transformations with the quiet, effortless grace of a planet gliding through the dark. We have journeyed from the familiar muscle-bound mechanics of our daily lives into the quiet, breathtaking geometry of the wider cosmos. We have pulled back the heavy velvet curtain of sensory habit to discover that gravity is not an aggressive, invisible rope tugging at our heels from a distance, but the very shape of space and time yielding to presence. This revelation does not merely rewrite the textbooks of astrophysics. It shatters the foundational illusions that keep human consciousness trapped in a state of perpetual exhaustion. It whispers to us that the universe is not a collection of fragmented, colliding parts shouting across an empty void, but a single, continuous tapestry of relationship, where the fall of an autumn leaf, the orbit of a planet, and the unfolding of a human destiny are guided by the same elegant, silent architecture. By understanding that weight is a consequence of resistance rather than a fundamental law of attraction, we are given a master key to unlock a new way of being, transforming ourselves from weary combatants into conscious architects of reality. To fully integrate this truth, we must face the ultimate illusion that has governed our collective psychology for centuries, the myth of isolated willpower. We have been conditioned to believe that the only way to change our lives, to heal our communities, or to elevate our consciousness is to deploy immense, forceful effort against a resistant world. We treat our minds like classical billiard tables, trying to smash our bad habits, drag our relationships into compliance, and force our societies into alignment through sheer political or emotional muscle. But this approach is an exhausting misunderstanding of the cosmic fabric. Borsas. It ignores the deep valleys, steep inclines, and historical depressions that have already been warped into the terrain of our lives. When we fight the environment through brute force, we are like climbers trying to scale a vertical cliff face with raw muscle, ignoring the beautiful, winding paths carved into the mountain's geometry. The result is inevitably burnout, resentment, and a profound sense of cosmic alienation. The transformational call of a curved universe is an invitation to step off the treadmill of force and enter the sanctuary of alignment. It asks us to shift our primary focus from what we are doing to what we are becoming, recognizing that our inner weight dictates our outer reality. And if you wish to change the trajectories of those around you, if you wish to draw love, abundance, or creative brilliance into your life, you do not need to hunt them down across an empty void or trap them with ropes of manipulation. You must simply cultivate a heavy, authentic grounding within your own soul. You must deepen your presence, clarify your values, and anchor yourself so thoroughly in your true nature that you create a natural, irresistible depression in the shared fabric of existence. When your personal gravity becomes sufficiently dense, the universe will naturally slope toward you. The people, opportunities, and resources that match your vibration will not be forced into your orbit. They will simply slide down the incline of least resistance, arriving at your doorstep with the quiet, effortless grace of a planet falling around a sun. And this realization demands a profound shift in how we view those who are struggling in the lowlands of human experience. When we observe someone caught in a downward spiral of despair, addiction, or self-destruction, our classical conditioning prompts us to judge them as weak or to assume they are choosing a crooked path out of malice. We shout at them to walk straighter, missing the invisible, warped topography of the space-time they inhabit. The wisdom of geometry reminds us that a path which looks wildly distorted from our flat, comfortable vantage point may actually be a perfect geodesic, the absolute straightest, most effortless line possible through a landscape that has been violently fractured by trauma, neglect, or systemic failure. This understanding dissolves our arrogance and replaces it with an actionable compassion. And we realize that to save the traveler, we cannot merely scream at them to change their direction. We must roll up our sleeves and work to heal, lift, and fundamentally reshape the very fabric of the environment through which they move. As we stand at this cosmic crossroads, the universe extends a quiet, revolutionary invitation to each of us. Look at the immediate landscapes of your life, your home, your workplace, your creative routines, and your emotional habits, and ask yourself where you are exhausting your spirit by fighting against a flat world illusion. Where are you pulling on ropes that do not exist? Where are you pushing against walls that could be bypassed through a simple shift in geometry? Let go of the desperate need to manipulate the outer world through friction and force. It's instead turn your gaze inward and begin the sacred work of environmental and psychological architecture. Design your spaces so that wisdom becomes downhill. Anchor your character so that integrity becomes an orbit. Lighten your baggage so that you can move through the world with the weightless freedom of an object in freefall, entirely at peace with the contours of reality. The great cosmic dance has never been a story of submission, domination, or heavy chains. It is a masterpiece of responsiveness, an eternal, localized conversation between energy and shape, where every participant holds the power to bend the canvas. You are not a helpless particle being buffeted by hostile, external laws. You are a living locus of geometry, an active co-creator of the universal tapestry. Every breath of authentic truth you take, every boundary of self-respect you establish, and every valley of deep peace you cultivate ripples outward through the invisible grid of existence, altering the pathways of stars and souls alike. Step into this truth with a spirit of wonder and responsibility. Stop striving to conquer the horizon and begin to embody the gravity of your own divine essence, allowing the rest of the universe to gather beautifully, naturally, and effortlessly around your light.